Okay, we're live. Going to let it breathe just for a moment here. Make sure we've got our 3 Facebook platforms plugged into tonight's show. Really excited to talk with y'all. Um, nice little spirited conversation, as always, taking place in the chat before the show. Love seeing that. Welcome in, everybody. It's the Mile High Huddle podcast. I'm your host, Chad Jensen. With me, my fellow football priest. You know him, you love him, Zack Kelberman. Zack, you've had a day to sit on the Broncos Raiders game, marinate on it, whatever you want, work out your hormones, as I like to say. How are you feeling about things one day removed? And like, has your perspective at all changed since yesterday?
No, in fact, I re-went and watched the game back, and I still feel the same as I did yesterday. The same takeaways were that the defense let the Broncos down. Damari Mathis, in general, let the Broncos down. VJ let the Broncos down, and the special teams let the Broncos down. There were so many players and factors at fault as to why they lost, but I came away thinking it was not Russell Wilson. It was not the offense. They averaged, I think, close to 3 points per possession over 6 possessions. So if you extrapolate that to a normal game where they get 12 to 15 possessions, that's 27 to 30 points. The offense did their job. Russell Wilson looked really freaking good on throws that were completed and throws that went incomplete, like the one to Dorsett down the sideline. That should have been a big completion.
Yeah.
I still feel the same. I'm not throwing the talent on the season. I just am maintaining confidence that the defense can find its way and the offense will continue to improve and peak.
I think Russ looked a heck of a lot. Like, to me, he had some obviously bigger statistical games last year than his 177 yards and 2 touchdowns yesterday. But his overall vibe, his overall comportment, the way he looked, his apparent presence of mind and poise, that was the closest thing I've seen of the Russell Wilson I expected the Broncos were getting via trade. In other words, the closest resemblance to the 9-time Pro Bowler in Seattle, the guy who many argue had built a Hall of Fame career before he ever got dealt from Seattle. But like I said last night, Zach, there's just a little fraction of me that is a little reticent to just come out and say it. Russ is back. I want to see another game, maybe 2. But I was really encouraged by Russ. It's unfortunate, like the way games shake out sometimes, Zach, especially the complexion of the game, whatever you want to say about it. But the second half ended up being so crucial for the Broncos because you had the Raiders, and Sean Payton talked about this today, Zach, in his conference call after he's watched the film and spent time with coaches and everything. The Raiders flawlessly almost executed their defensive game plan on the Broncos, which was basically, hey, go ahead and take the underneath. We're going to keep our deep shell, and we're going to go and let you have those $5 or 5-yard routes, whatever, complete. We're going to tackle well, make sure those don't turn into 15-yarders, and we're going to make you nickel and dime your way all the way down the field, Zach. That's what they did. Sean Payton, for whatever reason, didn't have an answer for that, even in the second half where things really hit a wall.
I mean, he also talked about the lack of explosive plays and, like you said, nickel and diming and taking what the defense is giving you. One common trope that's different from yesterday that I've spent the day kind of ruminating on is the fact that people think the Broncos don't have any playmakers on offense, on defense. If you look over the roster, they have plenty of playmakers on both sides of the ball. At some point, those playmakers, though, have to make plays. Courtland Sutton has to show more fight for a pass. Justin Simmons has to actually pick the ball off or deflect it when he gets near it. He can't be almost, Justin almost Simmons. So at some point, I think the coaches, for the most part, except for VJ, did a really good job as Breece Hall, or is that's Breece Hall watching the Jets game. VJ aside, the coaches did a really good job putting the players in a situation where they can perform successfully. But at some point, those players have to take the bull by the horns, take the mantle, and step up and be the playmakers that the Broncos desperately need.
And that's something, by the way, Mike, the Ronk in the house. So good to see you tonight, bro. Appreciate you being with us every single night, throwing down, supporting, contributing to the conversation. It really helps us keep this snowball rolling, and it definitely helps us keep the lights on here. So thank you, Mike. Lawrence Rivera jumping in to say, what's up, guys? I am so embarrassed about the whole kicker situation. I know I've been harping on it, but man, anyone could have seen this coming. Yeah, this was there, Zach. There were portents of this throughout the offseason, especially once they made the decision to go ahead and release Brandon McManus. The biggest thing being the first preseason game, both kickers, that were competing for the job, missing kicks, and you're going, oh man, here we go. And then the guy that they anoint, the guy that they are like, yeah, he did a great job. He won the job fair and square. Boom, you're gone, Brett Maher. And by the way, Will Lutz, come on in. So like if there's, you allow the Raiders, Zach, if you're Sean Payton, to extend their winning streak to 7 straight, that's a little bit of a, egg on your face. But the biggest egg on his face right now is he was the mover and the shaker. He was the impetus behind this whole kicker shakeup. And so far it has done nothing but really backfire. And I get it's only one game. There's time yet. He said he was confident post game. He said, I'm confident that, Will's going to get that figured out. He was surprised by the misses. Well, the missed extra point anyway. So we'll see, but he's got a point there.
I mean, he was also the impetus behind the VJ hire as well. I never claimed that Sean Payton was perfect, and I think the VJ hire, maybe the kicking situation, are 2 blemishes thus far on his resume. Fortunately, they have the entire season. They have 17 more weeks to correct it, and I think based on Sean Payton's comments today, talking about the lack of pressure, talking about the defense kind of wilting, talking about the no sacks, it sounds like he's told Vance, listen, this has to get tightened up. We can't continue on because the offense did their part. Don't look at the point score. Don't read the box score and focus on that and base your analysis around those factors. If you watch the game and you see how efficient the Broncos were, they scored on 4 out of 6 drives. And again, if you extrapolate that over a normal game where they have double the possessions, that's a 27, 30-point game. That's more than enough for the defense to clinch it out.
And that's something we were trying to help people understand last night, understandably, in a very emotional gut reaction. Everyone's emotional whether it was a win or if it was the loss that it was. Everyone's going to ride the emotions in the immediate aftermath of the game. But one thing we were trying to help people understand yesterday was, oh, look, only 16 points. Here we go again. The more things change, the more they stay the same, et cetera. And it's like, well, you got to kind of understand a little bit, drill a little bit deeper into the context of those points, the context of the game, the complexion of the game. And as Zach said, 3 first half possessions, 3 second half. Guess what? Raiders only had 6 possessions too. You don't count the kneel down at the end of the second quarter. So 6 possessions, 6 possessions. Here's something odd that, Zach, I learned reading Luke Patterson's takeaways article from last night. Both teams, this is easy. You can see this part in any box score. Both teams achieved 22 first downs. Okay, here's where it gets weird. Both teams achieved those first downs in exactly the same way. In other words, it was something like 10 passing first downs for both teams, 4 or 6, whatever, 6 rushing, and then X amount penalties. Okay. How bizarre is that? And Sean Payton was talking about that as well today, just some of the weird anomaly outlier aspects of yesterday's game, not as an excuse, but just kind of like, weird thing. The bottom line, Zach, is the Broncos missed field goal in the third quarter on their first possession of the second half. Then they get a field goal. Great. Then their last possession, where you got to keep the ball on the field. You got to stay on the field if you're the offense. They go 3 and out and punt, never to get the ball back again, as Jimmy G does what he does. And that's where you can't peter out like that. You can't run out of steam in games that matter. Sean Payton, another thing I really resonated with, something he said last night post-game. Look, in the NFL, the exception to the rule are teams that blow other teams out. The NFL is king for many reasons, one of them being, Zach, parity. Most of these games in the league, look across the scoreboards, they're decided by a single score. In other words, what he's saying is, we have to figure out and learn how to play our best ball and come up with our best plays, call our best things, whatever, in those critical moments, because those are the teams that get ahead in the league compared to those who don't.
Yeah, you know what? To be fair, I do believe the defense lost the Broncos the game, the defense and the kicker. But Sean Payton wasn't perfect. You talked about running out of steam. I mean, that showed itself in the offensive side as well. They looked like gangbusters in the first and second quarter, and it seemed like they got a little conservative and went into a little bit of a shell in the third and fourth quarters. And I always hate that. I don't care who's coaching, I don't care who's quarterbacking. You got to step on your opponent's neck for all 60 minutes. But when you talk about context mattering, yeah, they only scored 16 points, but 4 out of their 6 possessions ended in points, which is a massive improvement from last year. And also, they had an opening drive touchdown. Now, Chad, pop quiz hot shot. When's the last time the Broncos had an opening drive touchdown?
Shoot, I couldn't even tell you, bro.
2008. 15 years. So
Really?
Sean Payton comes in year one. It's what I read on Twitter. So
I'm just trying to think back to some of those Payton teams, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. Go on.
That's what I was going to say. When's the last time we saw that? And it's been exactly 15 years since we've seen that. So you can already tell the Sean Payton influence on offense is paying off. They were far from the problem. They did not lose the game because of the offense, and they did not lose the game because of Russell Wilson. Point blank, period.
Yeah. Just a quick shout out to Big Earn saying, "Go Broncos country only. Kicker gots to go." Kareem Jackson. Hello. Good to see you tonight, Big Earn. George Fox, what's up, bro? He says at some point in the game, we need to put the ball down the field, not just dink and dunk. The defense needs to blitz. Denver Broncos for life. Well said, my friend. We'll talk more about that. Taylor in the house. Thank you for the super chat, big dog. Really means a lot to us. You know this. He says, add to yesterday, VJ needs to be fired again. He was fired for a reason the first tenure, but with Payton as head coach, I have confidence we will win. Go Broncos. You know, it's so weird, Zach. Perception, right? And that cliche that perception is reality. Well, again, 17 points in a macro sense. If nobody saw the game, they'd go, and they didn't see a box score, they just saw the end score. They'd go, wow, VJ's defense holding forth. Sucks they kind of came up short, but 17 points. All right, all right. In the context of the opponent had 6 possessions only, and managed to score 17 points on those 6 possessions, it doesn't look quite as good, right? It loses some of the luster of, say, holding any opponent in the NFL to under 18 points is, a modest achievement. Mike Evans in his Good, Bad, and Ugly. I love reading his stuff. Former Super Chat superstar turned bona fide killer writer at Mile High Huddle. He was giving VJ's defense props. Hey, we got to figure out a pass rush, of course, but giving him props. So perception, you never know. I think there were some pretty clear vulnerabilities that the Raiders exposed to the Broncos. And if they don't get on top of that quick, it's going to become, the trend to do to the Broncos what the Raiders did yesterday.
I wasn't shaking my head at you. It's so frustrating, Chad, because you're echoing a narrative that I've seen on Broncos Twitter and in, Broncos comments and stuff like that the defense wasn't the reason. They only allowed 17 points and VJ did his job, but they couldn't get off the field to save their lives. I mean, ask Kareem Jackson. He admitted that. They couldn't get any pressure on Jimmy G, who is not exactly the most mobile quarterback. They couldn't get any sacks, despite this being the deepest OLB room that VJ's ever had. And they, like his usual defenses and like he's become known for, they wilted when it mattered. They could not make a stop in crunch time. They had multiple chances in the fourth quarter to get the ball back, and they couldn't do it. But Chad, this is who VJ is. And this is the point I made to you when they rehired him. He's always, and this is not my opinion, this is all numbers and fact, he's always had a bottom half ranked defense, except for 1 year that he seemed to build his whole career around. 1 year. Aside from that, he's always been subpar. His defensive philosophy is bend but don't break, but more often than not, they're bending and breaking. This is why I was so skeptical of the rehire and why a year later, I really miss Ejiro Evero.
Time will tell. Either way, Ejiro wasn't staying. He didn't want to stay. It was a curious decision to hire VJ. And I think his bend don't break general philosophy could work for the Broncos if and only if they can figure out how to manufacture pass rush in the pass rush situations, which was sorely lacking yesterday, like pathetically bad. Steve Hale, what's up, dude? Very generous super chat. Thank you, my dog. He says, another big Semper Fi, boys, right back at you. He says, couldn't agree more. Our big names need to make bigger plays. Loved the thought of getting Russ out of the pocket more. I was actually very impressed with Samaje Perine as well. Yeah, Perine averaged north of 5 yards per carry, and he made a couple of plays. I mean, the second biggest play from scrimmage for the Broncos, a 20-yard play. Want to guess what the number one biggest play from scrimmage was? How many yards? 21 yards. All right. They only had two 20-plus yard plays yesterday. Was Samaje. But yeah, he was impressive. Man, they grinded Javonte. It'll be interesting to see what kind of balance Peyton ultimately strikes with the running backs in the backfield moving forward, because it kind of this doesn't take anything away from Pookie. Samaje, there was one play on third down where he made a bad vision decision, tried to cut back and got tackled short of the marker, where if he would have just gone north, he would have easily gotten it. But you got to figure out how to balance those guys' touches. I want to see more from Perine. That's what week one left me feeling like.
He's a dog. I mean, capital D-O-G, dog. He was ripping off chunk gains, carry after carry. And I really liked his power, just constantly moving the pile forward. I was always a fan of the signing, and I think him and Javonte will work well in tandem. He talked about something that we talked about on the podcast later in the season. When defenses are starting to get tired and the weather's cold, that 1-2 combination, the body bruisers, him and Pookie together, are going to be a big boon for this offense and make games much more winnable. I was very impressed by him as well.
Phil down in Tucson, proving Broncos country is not a geographic location. It is, in fact, a state of being. Appreciate you, Phil, saying good evening, Chad, Zach, and Deacon Scott. I read Caden Stearns is out for the season. Any update on Dulcich? #Buckham, MHH for life. Thank you, bro. I mean, we titled the episode around Stearns being out and Dulcich, and we're now 16, almost 17 minutes into the stream. We haven't talked about it. Zach, your reaction to the news that Stearns, patellar tendon, if I remember, torn, done for the season, how that impacts not just the safeties, but the defense overall, and then just tell people what we know about Dulcich.
We don't know anything as of yet. Sean Payton, who's notoriously tight-lipped when it comes to injuries, all that he offered today was that Dulcich is getting an MRI, and they're awaiting the results on that. So I don't know if no news is good news or what's going on, but we have not heard word one about Dulcich. Stearns, I feel sick about. We might disagree on this slightly, Chad. I think you said yesterday that he's not – it's not going to shape the season, the fact that he was lost, but just his coverage ability, his playmaking ability. I think he had 4 picks in 21 starts for the Broncos. And going from him to Kareem Jackson is a major downgrade in that department, though they can weather it. They have Riley Moss coming back. They do have J.L. Skinner, who's a rookie, but he's progressing, I guess, nicely. So it's all up to, in the defensive secondary specifically, it's up to Simmons and Surtain, your 2 big guns. But the overarching pressure is on Simmons to me, because he's the highly paid guy, and he's still at times, like we saw yesterday, almost there, not quite, just almost making a play and coming up short.
It is looking like a prescient decision, though, to bring Kareem back. I think Kareem mostly played well yesterday. One of the things that Peyton talked about after the game yesterday, was it after the game or today? I don't recall. Anyway, one of the things Peyton has said since the game was one of the things that cost the Broncos was too many penalties, right? You want to get that cleaned up. And then when he was talking about how end of game situations can resolve in a win or a loss, and how the margin is so thin in the NFL in that regard, talked about, and you could tell he was talking about Kareem, how penalties can really torpedo your ability when it's that close, and just how often teams, an NFL game, how often it comes down to a team either in a 2-minute drill trying to get the points needed to win, or a defense in a 2-minute drill trying to defend a lead and keep them from scoring. You can't afford lapses like that, and especially from a 14-year vet. So he did have a good game. I'm glad the Broncos brought him back. But you need a little bit better poise in those situations. And I get it. Snap bang happens in a blink, but you should know by now, Kareem, especially in critical situations like that, you got to you've gotten in so much trouble with the crown of that dome of yours that you just gotta be smarter than that. Sorry.
It was ticky-tack, I'll say that. If you go back and watch the play, the guy who caught the pass was, like, lowering his it was Jacoby Myers. He was lowering his head already, and it was a bang-bang type of play, but as I talked about yesterday, that's the reputation that Kareem Jackson has as a headhunter, and when you have that reputation, it precedes you, it follows you, and the refs will judge you accordingly based on that. Like
Woofy, what's up, dude? Thank you, buddy. Says if the kicker made all 4 missed points on the and the last penalty, we win. Are we still talking about how our defense is? Well, yeah. I mean, the defense was a very complicit in week 1's loss. But you know what, Zach? If they had all 4, all right, I'm gonna of those points, the missed extra point and the missed 55-yard field goal. What was the final margin? So 17-16, 1 point. Do you remember where the Raiders ended that, where they were when they kneeled down? I'll tell you. They were on the Broncos 27. So that game, if those kicks were made, which again, I agree that they were a big factor in the loss, if they made them all, the Raiders were about to tie the game. So going to overtime or whatever, Broncos maybe get a chance to get it back. We would never know. It's happened in a different dimension, right? An alternate reality. But the kicker, here's how I would weight the big perpetrators of week 1's loss, Zach. I would say kicker. That was kind of a gut punch early, and it just kind of gave a little bit of a weird vibe for the game. Defense, no pass rush, defense, sloppy tackling, and then offense petering out in the second half, which also kind of dovetails with the kicker problem, etc. So it is the NFL, or I should say it is football, Zach. These things, they are symbiotic. You know, the 3 phases of the game are so crucial to have in balance and all carrying their own weight.
Yeah, and the Broncos simply aren't a good enough team where they can afford to make mistakes and still come away with a victory, especially in a tightly contested divisional game. You know, the Raiders or any other team in the West is always up to face the Broncos, and they are trying their damnedest to win. But Woofy, you know, what's the old expression? If my aunt had cashews, then, you know, she wouldn't be my aunt. We can talk about ifs all day, but the reality is the kicker did not get those points, and the penalty was the penalty. The Broncos did lose, and I think there's plenty to point the finger at, like Chad was talking about. I wouldn't point my finger at Russ or the offense, though.
I like the if ifs and buts were candy and nuts one. That's my favorite ifism. The Papa Bear, David McElrath, jumping in. What's up, brother? Says, good evening, Broncos country. Chad, Zach, Dylan, Deacon Scott, still 12-5. He's still believing. He's saying, he's channeling, I should say, his inner Steve Perry, some Journey. Don't stop. Believe. That's where the Papa Bear is right now. Appreciate you, big dog. He's saying Buckham ×3. You demand, David. Really, really love the optimism. And even if it was worse than what it was, all right, even if the Broncos lost 17-0, myopic negativity serves you not at all. You want to maintain optimism, you know, balance with realism. You want to be pragmatic. I mean, Nick is a very pragmatic thinker, for example, which often gets misinterpreted, I think, by a lot of listeners as negative Nancy or, you know, skeptic, etc. I like to take a little bit more of an optimistic tone. That's why I can appreciate a post like this, not to be blind to the realities of the situation, but guess what? If you don't believe you can succeed at something, you won't. So whether you think you can do it or not, you're right. Wrap your brain around that.
Love it. Love the movie quotes on the MHH podcast. And I'll kind of further a point that I made last night. You know, the Giants got trounced, for anyone who didn't see that game, 40-0 against the Dallas Cowboys. And that was at New York. That was a home game for them. The Seattle Seahawks, everyone's favorite around these parts, they lost 30-13 against the Rams, a team that many thought would be picking in the top 5. The Bengals a Super Bowl contender with the highest paid player in history. They lost, I think it was 24-3 to the Cleveland Browns, a team that many don't see going very far. And if you ask anyone from those teams and most people from those fan bases, they wouldn't say the season's over. They're not jumping ship. They're not throwing in their towels. So why should the Broncos be any different? It's one game, 1 week. It sucks. We hate losing to the Raiders. It was an unideal result and the way it turned out, but it's still only one game. A lot of football left to be played.
It's funny that you bring this up, Zach, because I'm not going to name names, but a friend of mine in this business reached out and we were talking about something via a text thread today. All right. And he said, hey, tough loss for Denver yesterday. Already looking better from last season, though, so maybe that's a moral victory. And I said, yeah, but the fans, tell that to the fans, who have been dying for 7 years, etc. Response: surely fans wouldn't overreact after the first week of the season? ? Division games are always tough. They'll be fine with a win next week. Then we get back, Zach, into the ifs and buts, candy and nuts. If they win, he's saying when they win, but it's an if. It's the league. Maintain the optimism, though. Expect a victory. Claude, what's up? And by the way, Claude, going off. Tim as well on Facebook with the stars. Thank you guys so much. Claude saying, what's up, fellas? The sting of yesterday has dulled a bit after paying all my lost bets. 4 snaps for Rodgers. Uh-oh. Well, I'm glad to hear the sting has subsided a little bit, my friend Claude. Appreciate you. We'll see what happens with Rodgers here. Tim as well again. Thank you, Tim. What's up, guys? Russ looked way better than last year. Finally, the O-line looks great. The runners don't fumble. That's another thing that, with a little bit of time behind you, and I'll tell you guys right now, I haven't rewatched the game yet. But with a little time behind me, the offensive line was significantly better than what it's been in years past. And even though McGlinchey gave up a sack on Russ to a great play by Max Crosby, I'm very encouraged, Zach, by what we saw from the O-line. 94 rush yards in a game that only had 6 possessions. Really, really nice to see. And for the most part, Russ was protected. I mean, the Raiders got a few pressures here and there and sacked him twice. But again, encouraged, something to build on, I think.
The pocket was way cleaner overall. I mean, Max Crosby, like we talked about before the game, he's going to get his. It's just a tremendous talent, and you can't keep him completely off the stat sheet. But I thought the interior was decent. Christian Mary got pushed around a little bit, but it wasn't anything too egregious. Quinn Miners had a hell of a game, especially in the running game, paving the way for Samaji and Pookie. So it wasn't the worst effort. Definitely something to build on, and better than what we've seen in the last couple of years.
Now, real quick, before we grab Nosh, I want to give you guys an update because we are now on the 11th day of September, which, by the way, September 11th, we all know what this date means for those of us in the US of A. And before this episode is out, we're going to do a moment of silence because it's been 22 years. Is that right? 22. I don't math that well. 22 years. Do you remember where you were on 9/11, Zach?
Unfortunately, yeah, I was in 7th grade. I was going into second period social studies, and my first period teacher came into the classroom with the breaking news, obviously, and we didn't understand what was going on at that age. No one really knew the severity of it. But then I got pulled out of school early. I remember just spending the whole day watching the news and not believing what was coming before my eyes.
I'll tell you real quick, and then we're going to do an update on the Super Chat contest. I was in college. I was in like year 1 of college, I think, and I was working a part-time job doing phone sales, right, to have a little walking around money. And it was a job where like a robot dialed the phone. So like it was one of those, if you've ever had a telemarketing job where like you hang up and all of a sudden and it's ringing immediately, like they just kept it grinding and no one was answering. It was really bizarre. And then finally someone answered. This is before, Zach, the proliferation of cell phones and everybody caller ID and everything. And you just kind of, your phone's actually telling you this is a suspicious call. Whatever you call it, brain farting this. Anyway, like my phone will tell me if it's a telemarketer or whatever. They didn't have that back then. They had caller ID, don't get me wrong, but the caller IDs were very basic. Finally, a woman answers. I start going through my pitch as I'm supposed to. She cuts me off. She goes, "Don't you know what's happening right now?" And I'm like, "Huh? No. What are you talking about? Turn on the TV." And she used an epithet and then hung up the phone. So I hollered down the floor to someone, "Hey, turn on the TV." And then I saw it. And I'm like, "Oh my goodness." Business ends, of course. That's it. We're under attack. Man, that was a horrible day. And we will have a moment of silence before this episode is out. Real quick, here's the update, though, guys. Let me drop this. 11 days in, you guys know the drill. We take the top 10 finishers on Super Chat in the given month. Their names go in a hat. The winner gets a Broncos jersey. Gets to choose a Broncos jersey, whichever one they want. So here's how it ranks right now. FA is at number 1. Been going off the chain. The Lady D, Deanna Hendry at 2. Gary the Swashbuckler Palmer at number 3. Nosh, who we're going to grab next, at 4. Zeus McPeak at 5, tied with Ethan, a.k.a. the DWI guys. Jasmine, the Duchess, Michaela Parker, and Troy tied at 7. And then rounding out the top 10, Gregory Vendeland, and you can see just a couple of the names, Patriot Tex, Chief Braided Hair Brady jumping in. So appreciate you guys. And, we're 1/3 of the way through the month. So still time yet if you don't see yourself or your name in the top 10 there. But we appreciate each and every one of you guys. Naj, what's up, bro? Curious to see how you're feeling one day removed. He says, "Hey, brothers, this one still stinks. I think the Raiders may be one of the worst teams in the league. So what does that say about us? I will continue to hope and believe, but bros, it's tough. We absolutely cannot go 0-2. Yeah, 0-2 would be pretty tough and devastating from a vibe and just kind of an overall momentum perspective, Zach. But one thing I want to say, and then I'm serving this back to you about the Raiders, and that you're right, Naj, they could end up being one of the worst teams in the league, but that all goes out the window in division games, especially in the AFC West. You just can't account for it. It's divisional matchups, and they tend to Zach, have depending on the team, they can have outlier type results where you see upsets more often than you would expect to, or teams playing better than they do against outside opponents, etc. So your thoughts for Nosh?
I mostly agree, Naj. On paper, they're not nearly as talented as the Broncos, and their defense, especially outside of Max Crosby, is pretty forgettable. So maybe one of the worst teams. We'll have to wait and see. But coaching. You know how I feel about that, and it really is the difference maker in a close game, a divisional game, a hotly contested game, what have you. And if you look at the coaching matchup or mismatch that happened on Sunday, it came down to Josh McDaniels versus Vance Joseph. And I hate to say it, and it bears repeating, that Josh McDaniels took VJ to the woodshed. He out-coached him, he out-game planned him, he outclassed him completely. So I'm not worried about the offense. And in terms of going 0-2, it's a little bit of an easier matchup when you're welcoming Washington into Denver as the Broncos are on Sunday, if only because, like Chad was talking about, it's not a divisional matchup. It's not the first game of the year. A lot of those jitters and the hype was all dissipated yesterday, so they can play hopefully a little more free. They can play a little more loose, and they can just tighten up on defense. If they do that, which is not an impossible ask, even with VJ, they will emerge 1-1 and have a chance to salvage the first quarter of the season, which, as we know, Chad, is so crucial. They get out to a hot start.
It's almost like VJ from his 4 years competing in the NFC West and going against Jimmy G twice a year and all that he was like that very much kind of colored the game plan for him. But it's like, hey, man, you got to put pressure on that dude or else. I mean, he's very similar to Derek Carr in the sense that the ball usually comes out pretty dadgum quick. And I think VJ played a little too scared on that front. And like we talked about yesterday, it's like they were acting like Jimmy G is Tom Brady when it comes to beating the blitz. And it's like, come on now. You got to pick and choose your moments, sure. But like Drew Sanders didn't even see the field. What happened to using him as a weapon?
Right.
You didn't even bother with him.
Exactly.
Like the defensive game plan in a lot of different ways was a little out of whack. And I want to grab this real quick from Jeremy. Always in the chat, always contributing great points to our conversations. He says, a year ago, we were being called buffoons. We looked pretty competent yesterday. Good, even. Yes, it's important to keep perspective. Agreed. My dad, all right, shout out, Mark Jensen. Not the most, he knows football, don't get me wrong, but he's not like the most educated when it comes to like reading the blogs, reading the film breakdowns. He doesn't really read much during the off season, but when it's football season, yeah, he's watching the games, he's following things. And he called me today. He's like, what the heck, dude? What's going on? This and that, right? You wanted to hear my thoughts on the game. We talked for a minute, and he said, well, look, wasn't the result we wanted. The Broncos only scored 16, but it looked different. Don't you think it looked different? And so I helped him understand, what does that even mean? Does it look different? And it speaks to what Jeremy's saying here. It just looked like a more competent, poised team overall. That will bear fruit as this season continues to march on, because the system's still seeping into everybody. It's still being assimilated. The expectations, the culture change, everything. It's still a little bit of a work in progress. And we were hoping, Zach, that in this first quarter of the season, which was the softest stretch on their schedule, that they could win more than they lose as they go through the trial and error learning curve process and kind of shorten that learning curve if possible. But it might not be in the cards to completely exploit this soft schedule, because Zach, there is the matter of chemistry, cohesion, everybody getting on the same page, everybody soaking up that culture and the expectations of the coaching staff. So just stay patient through this first 4 games, because that's another hallmark of Sean Payton, Zach, is not always the hottest starts his teams, but they end up being factors, in the season. So don't become too negative Nancy.
So happy you raised that point. I read something earlier that dated Sean's history back with the Saints, and his teams traditionally always started out either 1-1 or 0-2. And like you said, they get better as the season goes on. And, quite frankly, you don't want your team peaking in week 1. You don't want your team peaking in September. You don't want them peaking in October. You want them peaking in November and December, and preferably January, when the real football takes place. And I feel like the Broncos will get to that point. It was 1 week. The end result, again, no one likes losing to the Raiders. No one likes having a 7-game drought where the Broncos just can't find a victory. But if you look at the context of the game, if you look at the offense and not just read the box score, I'll amend something I said earlier. It was the first opening drive of the first game of the season, of a season opener, since 2008. But still, we hadn't seen that in 15 years. We didn't even see that in the Peyton Manning years, Chad. Sean Payton comes in year 1 with a supposed broken Russell Wilson and accomplishes the impossible. They are making strides. And when the offense isn't the problem, when the offense is actually carrying the defense, even for 1 game, it's a good situation to be in, because at least on the defensive side of the ball, we know they have proven talent that will eventually peak as the year goes on.
And if memory serves, Broncos opened against the Raiders in 2008. Jay Cutler. How weird is it, Zach, that 2008 was 15 years ago? I mean, that season, you guys all remember that big game week 2, the controversial end of that game where did Cutler fumble, didn't he? But the refs ruled that he didn't. The touchdown, the 2-point conversion, he and Rivers chirping at each other across the field. And 5 months later, he was a Bear. Went to the Pro Bowl that year. It was looking great. They ended up, squandering what was a really great start to the season by losing their final 3, and that's what got Shanny ultimately fired. But it blows my mind that was 15 years ago. GLP, Gary, bro, love you. Thank you for the super chat. It means the world to us, big dog. Hope you are doing well.
Thank you, Gary, as always.
Okay, Charlie, what's up, dude? Good to see you. Looks like you might have been at the game yesterday. Appreciate you being in the chat and throwing down some stars, my friend. George saying, I didn't care for VJ's defense before, and I don't care for it now. I'm with Zach on this. Denver Broncos for life, MHH for life. Yeah, he's got some splaining to do, as they say. But the biggest thing here, again, like the style of defense that VJ favors, which is man coverage, a lot of 2 deep, and a lot of, Wade Phillips-esque kind of pass rush philosophies. Definitely not as aggressive a play caller, obviously, as Wade Phillips. And it's not just Zach. Are you as aggressive as Wade Phillips as a play caller? One of the things that separated Wade Phillips from so many of the better defensive coordinators of his era, which is a long time. He's been in the league a long time. Was his gut knack for calling the right play in the right moment, just that feel as a play caller. And that's a hard. You can't really teach that. It's just something that a guy either has or they don't. Sean Payton's a guy that has it. Wade Phillips, a guy that has it. Gary Kubiak, Mike Shanahan, those are guys. We'll see if that can be a better developed trait, Zach, for VJ moving forward, because the game he called yesterday was very uninspiring.
I was going to say, yeah, it's not about blitzing versus not blitzing. It's about having situational football awareness as a coach. And that's why VJ was so terrible as a head coach, because he has so little. I mean, you see Damari Mathis getting worked over and over and over. Make an adjustment. Why wasn't PS2 on Devontae Adams the entire game? Why wasn't Drew Sanders on the field for even one defensive snap? That's what I'm looking for in a coach, whether it's an assistant, coordinator, head coach, whatever. Sean Payton has it in spades. VJ has none of it, and it came out yesterday.
Jonathan, the J-Fig in the house. Thank you. 2 nights in a row. Love it, dude. We've missed you. He says, we will correct penalties and the defense will bounce back. The offense needs to get aggressive and trust in Russ. We're really missing Bradley Chubb. Isang Bassi, shut down cornerback. Yeah, I mean, it's just hasn't been the same since Chubb was shipped off. And that's saying something, because it's not like Chubb as a Bronco was some game wrecker. He had some spurts. He had his Pro Bowl year where somehow he made a Pro Bowl with 7 sacks. Yeah, really bizarre. 7.5, I think it was. But Zach, they got to figure something out on this pass rush thing. As Scott brings up in our private chat here in the control room, Randy Gregory finished with an assisted tackle. That's it on his docket, right? Definitely has to be better when it comes to the pass rush and setting the edge and just being a presence, Zach, on the edge.
Yeah, like Scott said, you need more from him. He's the $70 million player, on paper anyway, and he's not cutting it. And I've talked up a big game for Randy Gregory in terms of what he can bring to the table, but that did not come out yesterday, and definitely he needs to step up. I want to talk about Isang Bassi, though, and give him some props. I haven't been his biggest fan historically, and he stepped up yesterday for K'Wan Williams and shut down Hunter Renfrow, who was invisible from the box score yesterday. He was invisible from the game flow. So I want to give Isang Bassi credit for doing that. What Damari Mathis couldn't with his man.
You know who else I hope to see more from yesterday was Zach Allen. Zach Allen was a little bit of a disappointment to me. He was solid in the run game, but whither is the interior pass rush and pressure? David, what's up, bro? Appreciate you. Good to see you. You know how much we really, really do value and appreciate the support, my friend. He says, missed kicks, bad tackling, and too many penalties tells you why we lost this game. Great show, Chad, Zach, and Scott. Yeah, we haven't talked enough about how much the penalties factored into this whole milieu, Zach.
A lot. I mean, anytime you have 10 penalties, no matter what they are, and especially where they're at, what point in the game they're called, it's going to impact your chances of winning. And the last one was the backbreaker for Denver. I said it was ticky-tack, the KJ personal foul, but like you said, he has to have better decision making in that moment. He has to know better, and you just can't win when you shoot yourself in the foot. That was my third key to victory for the Broncos in this game. No self-inflicted wounds. And they had self-inflicted wounds by way of penalty over and over and over. Death by inches.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Some of that I attribute, as far as the penalties, some of that I attribute to opening game jitters, not just for the players, but for the refs too. Like, refs get into a little bit of a rhythm when it comes to how they call games and officiate as well. So I do expect that to be improved. It's one of the hallmarks typically of a Sean Payton coach team is discipline. So I hope that and expect that to improve. Phil, did I miss something? Didn't we have a 1st and goal from the 8 and didn't run the ball once? Well, let's look. Let's take a look. I'm trying to remember that series. So let's see. 1st and 3 from the 3, so it's not that possession. Stand by. I'm taking a quick look here, trying to be thorough for you, big dog. On the, let's see, 1st and 10, 1st and 5. No, that's not it. Does this ring a bell to you, Zach?
I don't know the context that Phil is talking. I don't know the point that Phil is trying to make in terms of, is it Peyton's play calling? Is it the effectiveness of the passing game? I don't recall
Here it is.
exactly.
Here
the
it is.
possession.
Sorry
You're
to
good.
cut you off.
You're good.
4th, let's see, Denver, 1st and 10 from 1st and 8 from the Las Vegas 8. Russell Wilson pass short to Troutman, 3-yard gain. 2nd and 5 from the Vegas 5. Wilson, incomplete pass to Brandon Johnson. 3rd and 5 from the Vegas 5. Incomplete short right. Will Lutz, 24-yard field goal, good. So that was the one field goal that the Broncos had in the one score the Broncos had in the second half.
I mean, if the point he's trying to make is the Broncos didn't, cinch the game there, didn't, have the killer instinct, I agree. And that's what I wanted to happen. I even tweeted about it. I said, this is the time to go for the kill shot and put this game away. But we talked about it yesterday. After so many years of losing, and it's cliche, but it's the truth, the Broncos have to learn how to win again. They have to regain that killer instinct. It has to be natural, and they can't think. They have to just do. It didn't come out yesterday. Hopefully it's a learning tool going forward.
I think what he's trying to say is, why did the Broncos not run the ball anywhere on that 3 plays, right? From the 1st and goal on the 8, that's typically prime run the ball real estate, which I do get what you're trying to say. And it is kind of bizarre because this happened in the 4th quarter. And the Broncos, up until this point, Zach, had gone away from what was really working for them in terms of moving the ball, which was really capitalizing on the short passing game. And they had kind of gone to more of a dogged run the ball approach. And then and this is probably why, if you're trying to put yourself inside the mind of Sean Payton, they're going to expect us to run here, so we're going to throw. Didn't pan out. They had to settle for 3. Ended up being one of the kind of second half turning points anyway for how it all shook out.
I mean, we can all play Monday morning quarterback. No offense, Phil, but if Lutz makes his kicks or the Broncos defense gets a stand at some point in the 4th quarter, we're not even having this conversation, even with that sequence of play calling. So you're a hero if it works, and you're a goat, the bad kind of goat, if it doesn't.
Doug, appreciate you, my friend. Good to see you in the chat tonight. Hope you are doing well. We appreciate the support, big dog. All right, we're at 47 minutes. We got to go here soon, gang. So anything you want us to get it in the chat. But if you're just joining us, or if you've just joined us over the last few minutes, Caden Stearns, who exited the game yesterday, carted off, done for the season, safety, with a torn patellar tendon in his knee. Really a bummer. And then Greg Dulcich, we're still waiting to learn what the injury is and the timetable on him. All we know at this point, Zach, at least as far as before we went live tonight, was having an MRI, waiting for the results. So that's something Sean Payton typically he doesn't give information on that until he absolutely has to. In fact, yesterday after the game, he was asked immediately to update Stearns and update Dulcich, and he said, I will never, ever update injuries whatsoever after games. So, like, for what it's worth, maybe file that away, because I never, ever will answer those questions. But, Zach, real quick, I want to riff off something that the Mile High Dutchie said earlier, that he thinks this probably spells doom for Stearns as a Bronco. How do you think this overall impacts not just his Bronco career, but like playing football in the league for money?
I want to just tack on one thing to Dulcich. We know that the body part that's ailing him is his hamstring. And it's concerning because hamstrings, as we talked about with Jerry Jeudy, they tend to linger and they're so easily aggravated. And Dulcich came into the NFL, or at least started his rookie season with, you guessed it, a hamstring problem. So hopefully good news there, and it's not too serious. In terms of Caden Stearns' future, that torn patellar, it's almost on par with having an Achilles injury in terms of, if you're a player that relies on explosion or working in space, it's tough to come back from that. The lateral agility and the stop-start is directly affected. I pray that Caden Stearns will have a full recovery, but if you follow the Pro Football Doc on Twitter, David Chow, he says long road ahead, similar to Jamal Adams and the injury that he dealt with, the safety from the Seahawks. So hopefully he'll participate in the 2024 offseason program, but it could be a case where Caden Stearns' career was cut short.
The good news is for him, in terms of, I'm sure he's not going to give up on his career. It happened in the first game of the season, which who knows? I mean, Javonte Williams is a freak. He healed miraculously fast. Maybe this new staff can help kind of put some of those things that worked for Javonte to effect. We'll see. But I like this from Jeremy. The whole, if it's in butts, we're candy and nuts. If it's in luts, we're candy and nuts. Very nice wordplay. I appreciate it, my friend. But guys, we're out of time. We got a few messages for you, and then we're going to dip on out of here.
Another tremendous episode of the MHH podcast. If you're not doing so, please follow us on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at the MHH pod. You can follow the main account, the mothership as it were, at Mile High Huddle, Chad at Chad and Jensen, myself at Kelberman NFL, and Scott, our producer, at Scout Kennedy. If you guys want some merch, Buckham merch, MHH merch, hats, shirts, everything you can possibly desire, check it out at mhhmerch.com. And also leave us a like on facebook.com/milehighhuddlepod if you haven't done so. Also on Instagram at mile_high_huddle. And if you haven't, make sure you're leaving your football priest a 5-star review for a chance to win some of that merch each and every single month. But if anything, please subscribe, like, and share this video and every video you see on the MHH channel. It really helps us grow and reach more Broncos fans just like you.
Amen to that. A shout out to these great Super Chat superstars and supporters tonight on YouTube. We are talking about Taylor, Steve Hale, Woofy, David McElrath, Nosh, GLP, Jay Fig, David Wilder. On Facebook, we're talking Claude Riley, Tim Hoffman, Phil McLaughlin, George Fox, Doug Raquel, Charlie Young, Mike Ronquillo, Lawrence Rivera. Facebook leading the charge tonight. We really appreciate you guys. And keep your chin up. This season just beginning. Don't let a loss to the Raiders in a weird, tight-fought game cost you all of your optimism and hype and expectations and excitement for the 2023 season. Before we say goodbye, though, moment of silence. It is, in fact, the 23rd. Man, time is weird. It's a flat circle. Anniversary of 9/11. Moment of silence for the lives lost, all right, on that fateful day. Love you guys. Appreciate you. We'll see you again Thursday night.
Have a great start to your week. Catch Broncos for breakfast tomorrow morning. We're back at it Thursday evening. Talk to you then. Take care. And as always, go Broncos.